Hello there guys, it's me Unstable Voltage. Welcome back to my Europa Universalis 4 tutorial series. In the last video we looked at starting a game and some of the actions that you have to take right at the beginning before you can actually sort of unpause and get things going. But before we go any further, I just want to take a little step back and just go through a couple more things that are on the interface that we didn't really cover or didn't cover in any great detail in the last two videos. Specifically, what I want to point you towards in this video is the map mode options, because they are very, very important. This is a theme that you'll find runs across all Paradox games, not just EU4, but also things like Crusader Kings 2, Hearts of Iron, Victoria. All of those games have a lot of different map modes that give you information about what is going on in the game and actually in the world. So as I mentioned in the very first video, you have these 6 map mode buttons along the top of the minimap, and they are actually accessed using the first 6 keys on your keyboard. So if you're using a QWERTY keyboard, it will be the QWERTY keys. Obviously, if you're using one of the other types of keyboard, it's going to be the first 6 letter keys. Now, those keys represent each of the 6 positions, but you can actually swap these icons around. So first of all, let's go ahead and get rid of our minimap, and we can hide the minimap by sliding out the tray with all of the map modes on. And that is done with this little arrow here next to the map mode icons and above the minimap. If we pull that out, that will open the map mode tray. Now normally what happens is if you click on a specific map mode to open it, it will change the map mode and the tray will disappear. If you want the tray to stay open, you can open the tray and click the little padlock next to it, and that will keep the tray open even if you change map modes. Now, if you decide that one of these 6 map modes up here isn't any use to you, you can swap it out for something else. So let's take a look at this map mode here. We have the religious map mode, which is our shortcut key of T, because it's the 5th icon. Let's say we're not bothered about the religious map mode. So what we could do is we open the tray. We right click on, now you notice that the orders actually change slightly when the tray is open. So if we go and find the religious map mode, which is now here, if we right click that and remove the religious map mode, and then we go and right click something else, let's say for example the coalition map mode, if I then pull the drawer back in, we'll now see that the religious map mode has been replaced with the culture map mode icon, and now the T key will switch to that map mode. So let's, for the time being, just put it back to default, and I'll go through the map modes and tell you what all of them do. So first of all, let's go through the map modes in the order that they are actually on the hotbar usually, which is mostly the same order, except for some reason trade and religion are swapped around. So the first map mode you have is the default terrain map mode. This is what you would see the game as when you first load in. Now the main purpose of this map mode, apart from it's the one that looks most like terrain and the least like just coloured tiles, is you can actually see the different types of terrain. You can see forests, you can see farmlands, you can see mountains, you can see arid areas and desert to some degree. There's dry lands there. We've got some more dry lands. If we actually go down here towards Africa, we can see we've got more highlands. We've got desert over here. Now, it's a little bit difficult to tell sometimes because some of the terrains do look slightly similar. As you can see here, we have marsh as well. Now, there is an easier way to actually tell the different terrain types. So I'm going to jump down a little bit, actually, because while this one looks the best, there's a much more useful tool down here, which is almost the last icon, which says simple terrain. If you click simple terrain, that just colour codes all the provinces by terrain type. So all of the woods are this sort of green colour. Grasslands are this sort of light grey. Mountains are this sort of darker grey. Hills are a very similar colour. They're just slightly lighter. They're almost a little bit more blue than mountains. It might be difficult to tell on YouTube because of the colour limit. Blue again is farmlands. You've got the little orange provinces, which are highlands. You've got drylands. Grasslands are white. So you can tell much more easily the type of terrain that there is. Yellow is for desert, and marsh is a sort of a bluey green colour as well. So it's much easier to actually tell different land types. And then over here you've got steppes, got forest, woods. So a lot of different land types within the game. Now the reason that's useful is mainly for battles, because you get different bonuses and penalties for fighting in different types of terrain. So generally open terrains such as grasslands, you wouldn't have much of a penalty if you attacked someone in grasslands because it's nice and open and you can get the drop on an enemy army. However, if you were to try and attack somebody in the mountains and they've already got the defensive position, it's going to be very, very hard for you to attack them and you would get a penalty. We'll talk about that when we actually get into armies and combat, but it's very, very important sometimes to know what type of terrain you have. It's also worth noting that the terrain type actually affects how expensive it is to work on a province and actually... if we just select one of the province, how expensive it is to actually improve the provinces. So as you can actually see here, if we look at the tooltip at the bottom, it says the cost to further modify this province, development has a plus 23% negative modifier, sorry, not that one, a plus 15% negative modifier because it is woods. If we went ahead and looked at grasslands, and we looked at that, grasslands doesn't have the modifier for the terrain type, but woods does. So we go ahead and again look at that one. Woods is 15%. There's nothing for farmlands. If we wanted to develop a mountain province, the mountain province has a 50% development penalty. So the terrain type can make a difference to multiple things. So the next map mode is the political map mode, and this is the one that you'll probably play in most often, simply because it just makes it a lot easier to identify the different nations, and you can easily see what belongs to you and what belongs to somebody else, because everything is nicely colour-coded. The developers have been kind enough to try and make it so most of the colours don't clash too horribly. You'll very rarely find two countries adjacent to each other that have the same colour, although there are some that do have very similar colours. If we actually look at Ferrara, Milan and Mantua here, you can see they're all a sort of a pinky fuchsia colour. But they are all three slightly different colours. A little bit difficult to see because they're in the fog of war at the moment, but those are three slightly different colours. And if you're unsure, you can always just mouse over them. That's again the great thing about EU4. Mousing over tends to give you a lot of information. So that's the mode that you're probably going to play most of the game in. It's certainly the mode that I use the most often. The next one is then the trade map mode. Now that will actually show you some different colours. It actually splits the world up into all of these different trade regions. Now I haven't covered trade yet, and trade is going to be something that has its own video dedicated to it because it's actually quite complicated. But what you actually get to see on this map mode is you can see all of the different trade regions in the world. You can see all of these arrows moving around. Now these arrows actually indicate the direction in which trade flows. So trade moves around from one node to another. You'll also see on this map mode these little flags that are underneath each node, and they represent the different countries that have trade power in those nodes. Basically speaking, the more trade power you have in a node, the more money you can collect from that node, or the more trade you can force downstream to the next node. You'll also see these little icons here. These are our two merchants. If you remember from the first video, I said that we start with two merchants, but we don't have any available because they're currently both out. And if you actually look on the outliner, you can see that one of our merchants is in Genoa, and another one of our merchant is in Bordeaux. Well, the blue area is the Bordeaux trade node, and there's the merchant. This yellow area is the Genoa trade node, and there's the merchant. Now, Genoa is an end node because all of the arrows flow in, nothing flows out. So our merchant in Genoa is collecting trade. And what we've got over here, because Bordeaux isn't a trade node, trade flows out from Bordeaux into the Champagne trade node. And as you can see, this guy is actually forwarding 1.37 ducats to Champagne. So that's why there's a little tick here. Now, there's only one way the trade can go from this particular trade node. If he was in another trade node that has multiple outputs, say, for example, he was in the vein trade node, there are three different ways trade could go. And if we had a merchant here forwarding trade, we'd be able to tick one of these little up arrows to tell him which way to push the trade out. As it happens, there's only one way you can push trade from here, and you can see that we're applying trade power in that direction. But again, that's something we'll talk about when we specifically cover trade. Next is the HRE map mode. Now this mainly affects the area that will be or can be Germany. It's the Holy Roman Empire. You'll notice 5 different colours are a possibility on this map. First of all, you've got the lightest green. Lightest green is the Emperor. So by default, Austria starts off as the Emperor, although that can change as time goes on. You'll then notice the slightly lighter green. The slightly lighter green are the electors. Those are the people that get to decide who the next Emperor is. And then you've got the darker green, which represents the princes. Those are the nations that are part of the Holy Roman Empire, but that don't actually have any say in what goes on. If we actually click this button down here at the bottom, which is something we haven't looked at yet, it's down here next to the minimap. This is the Holy Roman Empire button. You may not always see this depending on what part of the world that you're playing in. If the HRE is not going to be relevant to your game, you will not normally see this. Also, if the HRE has been disbanded, you won't see this either. But if we go ahead and click on that, you'll get this little pop-up window, and what you'll actually see here, first of all, this is the Austrian flag because Austria is the Emperor. It's not going to allow me to move this window. But Austria is the Emperor. These are the 6 electors. Actually 7 because I can't count. These are the 7 electors. And these are the 55 princes. So those are all the nations that are represented by these colours. Anything that has these yellow stripes on means that the land belongs to the HRE, but it's currently owned by somebody who isn't a member. So if we look at Brescia here as an example, Brescia is actually part of Venice. Venice is this sort of cyan turquoise colour here. So Brescia belongs to Venice, but if we click on Brescia, if we left click, we see this icon here telling us that Brescia is part of the HRE. Whereas if we go and click on Venice itself, Venezia is not part of the HRE. So Venice isn't actually a prince within the Holy Roman Empire, but Brescia is. So that's why it has yellow lines across it. Also, if the Empire decided to take some more land and make that land part of the Empire, but it's not in the HRE, that would have grey stripes on it as well. But by default, none of the lands start like that. Then we've got the religious map mode. The religious map mode just shows you what the various religions are. At the very beginning of the game, there isn't an awful lot of choice, especially in Europe, but it does diversify as time goes on. Mostly things are just colour-coded to identify the religion. You will see there are some places where you do have these stripes, and stripes indicate that the religion of the province differs from the state religion. So if we look at Lithuania here, for example, if we go ahead and left-click on one of Lithuania's provinces, we can actually see that the current religion is Orthodox. So the people of this particular province, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, are followers of the Orthodox faith, but they're considered heretics by the Catholic state religion of Lithuania. So Lithuania is actually Catholic, but most of its provinces are Orthodox. So it's either going to have the option to try and convert all of its provinces to Orthodox, convert all of its provinces to Catholic, so they're the right religion, or convert its state religion to Orthodox. Otherwise, it's going to have a lot of religious unrest. Next, we have the diplomatic map mode. The diplomatic map mode is quite useful because it allows you to see certain things at a glance. You can see your own country, which is shaded in green, and any of your allies are shaded in blue. If we had any vassals or any personal union partners, they would be a different colour as well, although I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. And enemies are always shown in red. So if, for example, I go and I'll just make a declaration of war against England just to show this. So if we do that. So now if we actually look here, you can see that England are shown in red because they are currently my enemy. So you'll also notice these green stripy lines. Now before they were on a grey background because we weren't at war with England. They're now on a red background because these provinces belong to England. These green lines means that I have a core on them. It means I consider them to be my lands. They are rightfully part of my nation, but somebody else has them. So basically anything that's got those lines on means you should probably take them back at some point because they rightfully belong to you. Now, a useful thing with this map mode is you can also have a look at it from somebody else's perspective by clicking on them. So if I go ahead and left click on England, for example, you will now see that England is gone green, and you can see France in red because we are at war with them. And if England had any allies, you'd be able to see the blue colour for those. Let's go ahead, for example, and click on Burgundy. They're a good example. So now you can see Burgundy in green, and that's the colour that I couldn't remember. It's this sort of teal colour, and this represents the personal union partners and the vassals. So you can go ahead and click on any country with this map mode on. You can see where they have cores. You can see who their allies are. So I'm allied with Austria. If I click on Austria, you can see that I show as blue because I'm their ally. So it's a very good way to go around. Naples is in a personal union with Aragon there. It's just a good way to have a look around and see who's allied with who, who's a vassal of who, who's at war with who. Just a good way to have a look at things like that. So let's just quickly go through the rest of these map modes. We've got the opinion map mode. If you click on the opinion map mode, it actually shows you by colour coding any selected country what their opinion is of other people. Green is you really like them, red is you hate their guts. So with France selected, you can see that England is red, absolutely hate them, and Castile is orange because I hate them quite a bit. I hate Aragon less because they are yellow. There's nobody that we're particularly friendly with to begin with, so nothing goes beyond yellow. If we were to click on England, for example, they actually like Portugal quite a bit because Portugal is a shade of green there. There's probably quite a lot of people that do hate each other at the beginning of the game. But it's just a good way to get a sort of an idea of who likes who. As you can see, if I click on a lot of the Irish nations here, some of them like each other a little bit, some of them hate each other quite a bit as well. Then we've got the coalition map mode. Now, coalitions aren't something you need to worry about right at the beginning of the game. Coalitions tend to come about once you have started taking land from other nations. Basically, every time you take a piece of land, you suffer something called aggressive expansion. And as you get aggressive expansion, it affects your neighbours. And the closer someone is to you, generally, the more aggressive expansion you get with them. And eventually, if you annoy enough people, they'll band together to form a coalition against you. Now, as I mouse over any of these provinces and nations, you can see that it says that aggressive expansion is 0 because we don't actually have any to start off with. As we start to get aggressive expansion with these people, the nations will slowly start to turn red. And the darker the red, the more chance there is of them actually joining a coalition. And a coalition can be very, very dangerous, even to big countries like France or Castile, because a coalition can field a very, very big army. After that, we've got the region map mode, which basically splits the world up into what you could say is its sort of de jure regions. So we can actually see where the French region is, for example, even though it includes Brittany and bits of England and bits of Burgundy and bits of Provence, that is all the French region. We can have a look at the culture map mode and we can see what different types of cultures there are around on the map. And again, they're just split up by different colours. We've also got the unrest map mode. Unrest is basically when there's a chance of rebellions popping up in certain provinces. Now, luckily at the start of the game, we don't really start with any, so the local unrest is pretty much 0 everywhere. But if these provinces start to turn red, the darker the red they are, the more likely there is to be a rebellion in that province. Then we have the colonial map mode. Not much use to us at this stage in the game because we don't have colonial ideas and there's no colonising we can do. But if we actually mouse over an area on the map with that mode selected, you can see it tells us what the effective distance is and it tells us what our colonial range is. So our current colonial range is 160. Now this province belongs to us anyway, but its effective distance is 18.1. If we were to look at places further afield, we can see that this is 121.9, this is 201.6 and it's turned red. Which basically means, assuming that this place here was uninhabited, which it currently isn't, but if this was uninhabited, we wouldn't be able to colonise it because it's currently too far away. It also means we can't core it if we capture it in war, because you can only core something if it's within colonial range. So that's too far away. This province is too far away. This province is too far. So is that one. So is that one. But these ones here, these are close enough. So it's more useful for colonizing, but it can be very, very useful if you want to core a province that isn't directly adjacent to your borders. Then there's the technology map mode, which shows by colour the technological levels that people are on. You can mouse over any country and it will actually tell you the level of their admin, diplomatic and military tech. Most nations do tend to have very similar tech levels. So you'll often find that the colours are pretty similar across the map. There isn't usually much difference between the nations, maybe a couple of technologies is usually about as big as the gap gets. Now this next one's actually quite useful. This is supply limit. Supply limit is a concept that each province in your nation can only support a certain amount of troops at any one time, because your army needs a place to sleep, they need food to eat. So if we mouse over some of these provinces, you can see that the supply limit for this province here is 17, which means it can actually support 17 regiments of troops. The mountains here only have a supply limit of 14, so they can only support a regiment of 14 troops. And if you actually look at most coastal things tend to have a slightly higher supply limit. And the supply limit over here with these coastal farmlands is 33 regiments. Now we actually have a stack of 27 regiments sat here. If I have those guys selected, what you'll actually now see is a lot of the map turns red. What this is now showing me is that if I move this army through any of the red provinces, they are going to take a lot of attrition. Their current attrition, which is shown here, is 0, which means we're not taking any attrition. We're not losing any manpower. If I were to move this army through one of these red provinces, they would be suffering maximum attrition, and I'd be losing 5% of my men every month for sitting in a province that doesn't have a high enough supply limit. If I was to move through one of these yellow provinces, I wouldn't be suffering from maximum attrition, but I would still be getting some attrition from moving through them. And this map mode is actually very, very useful because it's dynamic. With these 27 regiments selected, all of the provinces I can't move through are red. If I were to split this army in half and just take a stack of 13 regiments, you can see that most of the area is green because 13 regiments are small enough to travel through most of these lands. There are still a few places that are red. If I was to split the regiments down even smaller and take 6 regiments, then they can go through some of these areas that have an even lower supply limit. So that's a very, very useful map mode if you want to march armies around without having half of the men die before they arrive. Then you've got the buildings map mode. The buildings map mode is something that's actually quite new in EU4 because of the way the buildings mechanics have changed. There's a limit to the number of buildings that you can build in any provinces. With the building map mode selected, the different hues of green represent how many buildings can be built in each province. Now, most of the provinces for France can only have one more building built in them. This one can actually have 2. It's very difficult to tell between the 1 and the 2. The colours are almost the same. You might notice that this province here is quite a different shade. It's quite a bit lighter because that can have 4 more buildings. There is a slight tonal difference between 2 and 1. But as you can see, they are very, very close. I'm not too sure why they used shades that were so similar to each other, because it does make it very, very difficult to see. But you can easily find out by just mousing over them, and it will tell you. Not only that, if you actually go to the buildings tab and select a building, well, it's not going to let us do it on forts for some reason. But normally, if you actually go into the buildings tab, it will show you how many buildings can be built in each province. So on from that, we've got the players map mode. That's only really useful if you're playing in multiplayer because it shows which players own which regions. But I'm playing a single player game, so that's irrelevant. There's the accepted cultures map mode. Now, we have looked before at the cultures map mode, which shows which nations have which culture. But you will also find that within your nation, you may have several different subcultures. And the accepted cultures map mode basically shows you which cultures are within your nation that are accepted as an accepted culture of your nation. So, culture is something that we are going to cover in another video because it does get quite complicated. Then there's the winters map mode. This is very important because different areas of the map suffer different types of winters. So if we look at places like Castile, which is a very hot, close to the equator nation, it doesn't really have any winters. Although if you look up in the mountains have severe winters. If we look at France, for example, France has mild winters. And when you start going up into places that are in the highlands, they generally have severe winters. This will affect certain things, particularly attrition on troops. If you're going to put your armies in places with severe winters during the winter, they will take a lot more attrition than they would in the summer or somewhere that would have a mild winter. You've also got the opposite of this. You've actually got the climates map mode, which will allow you to see the difference between arid climates, temperate climates, and Arctic climates. There's also, I think, forests. There's a couple of others as well, which we can't see because of where we are on the map. Then there's the Colonial Regions map mode. Again, not really any use to us at the moment because there's so much of the map that is still covered. But if we were to go and look, for example, at the American continents, we would be able to see the different colonial regions of America that we could set up. And again, colonization is something we'll cover in another video. Trade companies as well is something that isn't going to really make much difference to us here. Trade companies are very similar to colonial regions, except they concentrate more on giving us trade power than anything else, and we'd be able to see those with that map mode. Trade goods is also very useful because it allows you to see via icon and via colour code which particular trade goods are produced in every province. Some trade goods are generally worth more than others. So for example, if we look down here at Perigeux, we can see that they produce iron and its current price is 3 ducats, whereas if we look at something like grain, grain is only worth 2 ducats. Now you do also get several events that can happen throughout the game which can temporarily increase or decrease the price of certain trade goods. And basically the more high value trade goods you have in a trade region, the more money you will make from trade. So it's a good way if you want to see what your sort of most produced good is within your nation. On from that, we've got local autonomy. Local autonomy is something that is granted to each individual province. And it basically says, for each province, how much control you give to the local government. Now, giving a province more autonomy will make the local government like you a little bit more, and therefore you'll have less unrest. However, giving more local autonomy also means that you don't get as much manpower, you don't get as much tax, and you don't get as much trade power. So ideally, you want the autonomy to be as close to 0% as possible. It does go down over time automatically, but you can buy it down at certain intervals. You can also buy it back up. If you've got unrest, you can grant them more local autonomy. Also, if you actually capture land from another nation in a war, you will automatically get some local autonomy on that land when you capture it, because obviously they don't really like the fact that you have just taken over their little province. Then you've got the forts map mode. Again, this is something that's new to common sense, because previously you could build a fort in every single province. Now forts are used more sparingly and actually have a zone of control, but clicking on the fort level map mode will actually show you where your forts are. So we can see all of our forts, or all of the provinces where we have forts, are shown in green. Now they're all light green because they're just a fort level 2. Our capital is a slightly darker green, which shows fort level 3. It's a little bit confusing, and again, there is going to be a video on forts, but it's actually technically only a level 2 fort, but because it is our capital, we get an additional level for free. So it takes it up to a level 3 fort. And then you can see we've got the red provinces here. These are where we have forts that people we're at war with own. So as you can see, all of these red provinces have English forts in them. And then all of the blue provinces show us where there are forts. A lot of these will just be fort level 1. So like if we look at Lorraine, for example, they have a fort level 1, which means they don't actually have a castle in their capital, but they just get the free fort level for it being their capital. Just a few more map modes to go. We've already talked about simple terrain. We've got the rivals map mode, quite self-explanatory. We see our own nation in green. All of the orange nations are nations that we have rivaled. All of the yellow nations are nations that have rivaled us. Bear in mind, some of these can be the same. So for example, Castile has rivaled me and I have rivaled Castile, but they show as orange in that map mode. And we can also click on another nation Oh, they've removed that functionality. You used to be able to click on another nation and see who they've rivaled. You can still find that information out by actually going to their diplomacy screen. You can actually see who their rivals are, but it's no longer changing on the map mode, which is a bit of a shame. And then finally, you have the economical map mode, which basically shows you the base tax in each province. A little bit of a redundant feature now, considering that provinces don't just have base tax, they also have base trade and base manpower. But this basically shows you how which of your provinces give you the most ducats per month. Unfortunately, I think it only factors in base tax. It doesn't factor in the penalty that you get from things like local autonomy and the bonuses that you get from having buildings. But as you can see, the lighter the green, the more base tax. So Paris gives us 10 base tax, Orléans gives us 8 base tax, Berry gives us 7 base tax. And if you go down to the dark red ones, even though this obviously belongs to Castile, not myself, that only has a base tax of 2. So you can tell at a glance which of these provinces give, most of these very, very dark crimson ones only have a base tax of 1. So those are all the map modes, and I'm sure you will find a use for them. It's one of those things that you'll probably find in the early game that you don't tend to rely on anything other than the political map mode for seeing where the countries are, and maybe the diplomatic map mode when you're at war, because when you have to start using your soldiers to siege enemy provinces, it's nice to have that on so you can see which provinces belong to the enemy. Especially if you're fighting in the HRE, when you tend to find you'll have lots of different enemies dotted around all over the place, and as you can see, there's a lot of different nations in this area. So it's very, very useful sometimes to actually have those map modes enabled. But if there's any of these map modes that you use more than others, feel free to go ahead and customize that top bar so that you can switch between them more quickly, and rely on these map modes a lot because they do provide you with very, very useful information. So that's pretty much all I'm going to cover on the map modes. I will talk about the individual features of them more in depth on the appropriate videos. There's a couple more things on the interface that I do want to go through, but I don't want to make another long video just going through the interface, so we'll actually cover those things as we come to them. And they include things such as the log, which is this thing here, pop-up alert messages, and there's a few other little bits and pieces that we will get into. So when we come back on the next video, what we're going to do is look a little bit more into the game's mechanics. We've already covered alliances and rivals, and we're going to talk about espionage, about claiming provinces, fabricating claims, and going to war. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you are still enjoying this tutorial series, and I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye for now.